Story 1. I was married to a physician and had a good friend who was an ophthalmologist. They would spend hours on the phone refuting a $20 charge. Story 2. Dated someone from a billionaire family for a short time in college. What shocked me was the level of sadness and trauma. Addiction, suicide, mental illness, family separation, all things you would think of as more common in poverty were actually also common at the other end of the scale. Story 3. A guy who sold a startup during the first dot-com to a larger company. A total engineer, nerd, inventor, technologist with buckets of money. I told him about my severe flight anxiety when doing monthly work trips to New York City from the Bay Area, and he suggested that I take a Gulfstream G650 and avoid taking a Gulfstream G550 because the bigger windows help with that. I tried to explain why flying private wasn't really an option and that I fly commercial, and it was a bit of a "it's a banana, Michael, how much could it cost" conversation at that point. Story 4. In my early 20s, I was very close friends with someone I didn't know was from an extremely wealthy aristocratic family. Technically, her title was Lady, but I only ever knew her as just plain Rosie. Her father was a baron, a hereditary peer, and owned a vast swathe of one county in England. Rosie was doing everything she could to make her own way in the world and to build a life for herself on her own terms. Her sister Fiona was a whole other story. Fiona didn't work. She shopped, traveled, and shopped wherever she traveled. One day, she asked me why I worked and couldn't comprehend the idea that I didn't have access to effectively unlimited funds. She argued with her mother once while I was there, stormed out of the house, and came back a few hours later in a brand new Toyota MR2 she'd bought on her father's American Express account to cheer herself up. She didn't need it, she didn't really want it, but it made her feel better for a few hours, and it was only the equivalent of £25,000, so why not? His response was what got me. Nothing more than one raised eyebrow. Story 5. I've worked in several casinos in the Pacific Northwest and have had a lot of regionally wealthy regulars over the years. The thing that always stands out is how casually they bet high, talking $50 to $80 per spin on a slot machine for 6 to 12 hours at a time, almost nonstop, multiple days a week. The one that sticks out with me most is this one guest who owned about 10 franchises of a little restaurant chain known for golden arches. I knew her well enough from serving her, and one day, she hit a $46,000 jackpot. I brought her a beer while she was waiting to get paid out, and I asked her why she wasn't more excited about winning almost $50,000. She looks up as she tips me and goes, "I'm still down $30,000 today." That was when I knew that no matter how much money I had someday, there were certain ways I wouldn't be spending it. Story 6. My brother dated a woman in college who came from wealth. She could not understand how he did not have money. He ended up having to take her to an automated teller machine and print out his account balance, which was $60, and explained that it was all the money he had until his next paycheck. There was no hidden source of cash, no parents giving him money, nothing but the $60 and hoping to keep his job. She was a really cool girl in all other ways, just spoiled and sheltered. Story 7. Dated a girl who came from old money, like hosting presidents at their Greenwich, Connecticut mansion. All the grandchildren rebelled against it, wore old dirty clothes, shopped frugally, and did the dirty hippie thing. But she would begrudgingly go to Monaco every year and accept the yacht invitations from the family. Even if people looked unkempt, everyone in the family was very healthy. There was no struggle except for self-imposed hardship and that one cousin who got into drugs and was sent to a $50,000 per month rehab retreat in the Berkshires. Story 8. I dated a rich girl in college during the 1990s. The family was very wealthy from old money. She would be oddly cheap about some things, like collecting money for the keg at a party, and the next week just write a check for an addition to her home that she bought to live in while attending school. Her dad had a barn full of mint vintage Porsches. They had a debutante ball for her sister, which is still the fanciest, most pretentious event I've ever witnessed. I had to rent a tux and decided to take LSD for it, which was kind of terrifying but also amazing. So many sparkles. Cosmetic surgery was standard for the women. They were all completely insane. Dating her was fun for a while, but the insanity got old pretty quickly. I wound up marrying a nice girl who grew up poor. Story 9. Know someone who is a literal member of the aristocracy, and lives in a castle but drives a beat-up old banger of a car. The same with clothes, he will wear them until they have holes in them. You can tell by his speech that he is posh, but by the way he lives you would never know. Story 10. Currently dating someone who comes from a very wealthy family. What has shocked me the most is how worry-free they are about anything that costs under $100,000. Buying things like horses and going on multiple international trips a year is common, moving from one house to another with multiple homes in different states. All this while also totally neglecting their personal vehicles. It's easier to buy a new car than it is to take it to the shop for brakes or oil changes. Story 11. My best friend from high school is super wealthy. She got her 19-year-old daughter a diamond bracelet for Christmas. And because it was an $800 bracelet and not the $3,000 one she wanted, she threw a fit, tossed the bracelet across the room, and had a meltdown. I just couldn't fathom being that entitled. Story 12. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, comes from wealth. His family practically owns the town they live in, and I found out a couple of years ago that his parents are legitimate millionaires. The thing is, though, they are the kindest, most down-to-earth people I've ever met in my life. They accepted my sister and our family, who grew up very poor, with open arms and have never come across as judgmental. I remember when I met his extended family, I was nervous because I have blue hair, piercings, and tattoos. I thought they'd be standoffish, but they were so sweet, and I bonded with his grandmother over art. They've never judged my fiancé for his history with addiction. They were just as kind when meeting him. He met them before he met my parents. I know this is a long response, but I love his family so much. They care about everyone they meet and are the first people to offer a helping hand regardless of the situation. Additionally, they don't live a grandiose lifestyle. They have a nice house and go on family vacations every year, but they don't flaunt their money in any way. They don't buy a bunch of designer clothes, they have normal cars, and they don't spend their money on materialistic things on a day-to-day basis. Story 13. How he took everything he had been given for granted and had never had a proper job his entire life. Just projects his father funded that would all fall apart. Story 14. How much money was used as a means to make up for the fact they did not know or like each other within the family. Relationships are calculated to look good and forward the family's financial standing more than anything else. Money is the main thing that ties the family together, not genuine love and concern. Story 15. I have a friend in one of my small circles who is extremely wealthy. He and his family live in a huge house in the most expensive neighborhood in a major city. They take a lavish vacation at least once a month. I could go on, but the real kicker is that no one else seems to know what he does for a living. Story 16. I know an incredibly wealthy family who can afford to fly on private jets. Instead, they fly economy class on budget airlines. As my dad says, you don't get rich by spending all your money. Story 17. How careless they were with money. We had tickets for a birthday trip. He canceled and let the tickets just go to waste. We had tickets for a hockey game. He got mad and we canceled. Luckily, I was able to sell the tickets. So much waste. He would always tell me, you need to start thinking like you have money and not like things are limited for you. Hell no, my guy. Now we're not together, and I can never not be frugal. Such a wasteful mindset. Story 18. I have a friend whose family is well off. Not wealthy enough for a private jet, but wealthy enough that buying a farm because it would be fun was all it took to essentially buy Harvest Moon, and even a decade later it isn't remotely close to breaking even on just property taxes, let alone the cost of it all. They don't consider saving money to be the same as lowering stress. Something as benign as looking at two similar hotels, with one right at the conference center and the other a 2-minute walk away but $50 cheaper per night, so $200 versus $150 a night, means that the convenience of not having the comically short walk is worth the $50. Story 19. He wasn't wealthy, but his entire family was. What shocked me was their family game nights, where winning a board game could get you imported glassware, Michael Kors handbags, or top-shelf scotch. Story 20. How out of touch she was with normal people. Her parents gave her 3 houses, 1 to live in, 2 to rent out. She couldn't wrap her head around why people don't always buy the best version of things. Story 21. My long-term partner's family lives in Southeast Asia and are part of the royal family and are billionaires. I'm talking about a $40 million house, an underground garage with over 14 luxury cars, and a staff of maids and employees working around the house. When we went to visit, one of the drivers picked us up in a Bentley. What shocked me most was how out of touch they were. We were traveling Southeast Asia at the time in our early 20s and just out of university, and they asked us, "So when you get back home from your travels, will you be purchasing a house?" We had just graduated and spent what money we had on travel. "No, we will not be buying a house." The kids all had 2 cars, a weekday and weekend car. It was amazingly flashy at first and easy to be impressed, but I noticed after coming away from it I always felt really depressed. Obviously, they don't owe us anything, but they are literal billionaires and we are back home with student loans trying to start our careers. All I'm saying is if I had infinite money, I'd be helping out my entire family. Story 22. I did for a short time, but it was more about me being an arm candy type of thing. What shocked me was paying for things and not really worrying about the total cost. The random services he paid for were surprising. He had lots of birds, and he had veterinarians come to his home to do bird checkups like once a month. Another random service was provided by people who showed up with samples of shirts, pants, and jackets they thought would look great on him, and if he liked them, he bought them. That same person showed up for me a few times. Story 23. Not really a lifestyle thing. More like she just had zero ability to relate to financial stress and had very little sympathy for people who struggled financially. It didn't work out, but I still consider her a friend and wish her nothing but the best in life. Story 24. I know a billionaire and 2 very wealthy trust fund kids. The billionaire is very low-key. Other than his car and watches, you would never know he has any money at all. He does not talk about vacations, money, houses, cars, nothing. He is very humble. The one trust fund kid is the same way. The other one, well, not so much. He will tell everyone he meets he is rich. Wears designer clothing, shows off his cars. Talks about spending like everyone can do it. If I had not known him since I was 9 years old, I would not associate with him at all. To me, he is just him, but to others, he is an arrogant person. Story 25. Yes, I dated a retired gentleman whose hobby was raising and training racehorses. He had a farm for the horses and kept the actively racing ones stabled at one of the major South Florida racetracks. He was a fun, easygoing man who lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment and drove a higher-end Ford, usually packed with horse-related stuff. He had set his 3 kids up with trusts so they were comfortable but said if they wanted to be rich, they could earn it themselves. His wife had passed from early-onset Alzheimer's. He was just living his life and wanted company to go out to dinner and a movie, which honestly was all I wanted as well. I was running my own business, recently divorced, and too busy to be looking for anything else. Just your average Joe who happened to be a multimillionaire. Story 26. Social relationships were much more calculated, chosen based on who they know or whether they make a talking point. And not just by her, but by people who wanted to know her. The conversation came up when she told me about her family's 3 houses in Oahu, and I reactively made a comment, "Wow, that's probably more than my family's whole net worth." She did not like that. Story 27. They had liquidity of tens of millions of dollars and much more in assets, but went to work every day and studied to further their qualifications to better themselves, to be an example to their kids. Respect. Story 28. I was sleeping with a girl whose dad was super rich and lived in a several million-pound mansion in Alderley Edge, a very wealthy part of Manchester. Her mom owned stables too and was like a horse lady rich. She didn't act like she was from a rich family at all. Story 29. Just calling and asking her parents for money whenever there was something she wanted was mind-blowing to me. She would want to order Uber Eats, and she would just call her dad and say, "Hey dad, I want to order some food for lunch. Can you send me, like, $40? And he would. This would happen multiple times a week with so much random stuff. Her parents also helped her with all her bills. I have never seen anything like it. Story 30. Brother-in-law is wealthy. Basically, it's obvious that his, and now my sister's, lifestyle is very luxurious. But the funny thing is how he will drop $50,000 on some amazing experience, no questions asked, but will still comparison shop for, say, peanut butter. It does give me some insight into the super rich and why they still try to manipulate policy to get richer. A lot of people ask, when do they decide they have enough money? While prestige might be part of it, I think more is actually ideological. Just like my brother-in-law thinks that peanut butter shouldn't be $6 even though money is nothing to him, the super rich truly feel righteous about the amount of money they feel they should be able to have. Story 31. I was dating someone whose dad and stepdad were both prominent figures in the garment district in New York City. Nothing shocked me. She wasn't some rich, spoiled princess. She was in the theater program in college and had one goal and one goal only: to act on Broadway. All she wanted to do was theater. Theater only, no television or movies. Other than not having to work herself, she wasn't any different than anyone else I knew. She did have a couple of quirks. She was fascinated by walking around Meijer, similar to Walmart for those that don't have Meijer in their area, because they didn't have stores like that in New York City back then. She also loved drive-through carryouts for the same reason. But that was all due to her growing up in New York City and had nothing to do with coming from money.